Hey guys, finally getting back to installing that vintage glass door, but before I do I wanted to give you a look at one of the few remaining original doors in our house. And this is actually one of the smaller doors, like a closet type door. It's actually the door to the basement. There's only one original full-size door left in this entire house, and it does not have its original hardware on it anymore. And this is what the original hardware looks like. I'm not sure what kind of metal it is. It might be steel. I suspect it is because there's a little bit of corrosion here and there, but it's been painted brown or treated somehow to sort of make it look like aged brass. And you see those original hinges. And I noticed that this is cut at a bit of an angle. I don't know if that's from when they originally built this place 100 years ago, or did the house settle over time and the door started binding and they had to trim it a little bit. Upstairs now, and I'll show you what we do have in most of the house, is these super cheap hollow core doors. And I don't know why, but there are no thresholds on these doors. The old maple floors are in great shape. Why is there no threshold here? I'm pretty sure these are the original door openings. So where'd the original doors go? Why is there no threshold? I mean, there's no way they would have built this house and just left this seam like this. There's a pretty big gap under the door too, so I can just go to the home improvement center and get an oak threshold and just slap it down one of these days. But I definitely want to replace these doors. These doors are so cheap that they're all falling apart. Just from being the stress of being open and closed so much as they're cracking. So it's really thin wood with like a honeycomb of almost like cardboard inside, and a little bit of solid wood around the perimeter and around where the door thing goes. But in this, I could almost just rip this doorknob off. So cheaply made. And again, same here, no threshold and a huge gap below it, so it does nothing to stop airflow or deaden sound or anything like that. See, this one's falling apart too. So that's why I wanted to salvage those doors. Unfortunately, I think I only got 2 full-size doors, whereas I would need 3 to do all these. But hey, at least to start. Okay, back to the project at hand. So, well, I've already done a little bit of test fitting. Well, let me give a little history first. So this is my wife's studio. It's an addition to the house. Originally, this was the outside wall. This door opening was a window. I know that because there's about 10 houses in a row that are all the same basic floor plan that have had, with the exception of one house, they've all had stuff done. Most commonly, the additions put onto them. The one house that hadn't been altered is the one that I salvaged those doors from, and now it's been completely gutted and rehabbed. Although they kept the exterior exactly the same, they just put new siding on it. So, and actually, they did a really, really nice job on it. So anyways, back to this. So what I can tell you is this vintage door, perfectly square. I was quite surprised. So all these angles are perfect right angles. The door isn't twisted or warped or anything like that. Can't quite say the same for the opening it's going to go into. Now, vertically, this opening is pretty plumb, and the width is great. I got just enough room to put in some, well, to build a door jamb. And the hinges work out great too, because the door has to swing into this addition. I don't know why, but when they built this addition, it's about 4 inches higher than the adjoining room. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because there's an addition below this half, and below this half there's nothing. There's a door that opens to the outside, and then there's a deck. So I don't see really any reason why they couldn't have put this lower. Maybe, I don't know what kind of floor jambs or floor joists they use. Because the addition below here, I mean, so what if the ceiling was lower? It's just a little like breakfast nook kind of area. So I would have definitely sacrificed maybe a little headroom for below to make the floors level up here. So What does that mean for me? Well, this opening is not quite high as it should be for a standard door opening. Plus, it's got carpeting and padding underneath. I'm not going to pull up the carpeting and the padding. As crappy as this carpeting is, for the time being, it's going to stay here. And this door opening, it's pretty darn solid. So that's not getting altered. So, door's going to have to get altered. So as I mentioned, the sides are parallel and plumb. That's great. The door opening will fit. But the top, no. That's why the door looks kind of goofy in there. You can see it's a wider opening at the top. Then it's narrowed down. Now, traditionally, if you got a pre-hung door like this, which is what I was going to originally use in there, but we decided we really wanted to have glass to let light go through, and this is kind of a fugly, cheapo door anyway, so I'm not going to use that. But if you got a pre-hung door, what you do is you put it in the opening and put in wedges to work things out, if you can. In this case, though, things are off enough that I don't think that's really the way to go. Plus, the door has to be trimmed to fit in the opening. So I got to trim the door anyways. I might as well cut the bottom at an angle. And I got plenty of extra wood down here. So I want to leave a little bit so I can put in something like this, which is like a little, it's got like a 1/4 inch of fabric at the bottom and then brass trimmed. Make kind of an airtight seal. So I'll probably need to trim the top a little bit too. So in other words, keep the sides level and or parallel to the opening, and then work out the top and bottom. It'd be great if I could just trim the bottom and then I'm good enough on the top. If it's a little bit sloppy, not the end of the world. This doesn't have to be the most professional job. It's a $15 door after all. We just want to put something in here because this area is not heated. We use space heaters in here when we do want to use this and it's cold, but otherwise it'd be nice to have some kind of seal. What we did last winter when we had the polar vortex, we just got a big piece of foam board, which made a phenomenal difference. The adjacent room was nice and toasty. This room actually went below freezing. There was ice on the inside of the windows. So, where to start? Well, what I'm going to have to do is prop up the bottom of the door so that the sides are perfectly in line with this door opening, and then use some kind of like compass thing to scribe where I want to cut this. Grab a couple sawhorses and then cut it. I am a little wary of using a power radial saw. I have one, but this is really old glass. You can see it's wavy, it's got defects in it, it's just a single pane. I'm a little wary of the vibrations of me cutting this with an aggressive power tool. Might shatter the glass. I also got a jigsaw I could use, but those tend to wander a little bit. Yeah, I could try clamping a board to this and use the jigsaw and use that as a brace, and I could probably do an okay job. But what I'm going to try doing is just a good old hand saw. I got a brand new rip saw. I don't know, this might be pine or poplar, probably most likely poplar. It's not too hard to cut, so I'll start out there. But first thing first, I'm going to remove this stuff and then get some wedges or something to get the door seated in the opening like I want it to be. And then work out exactly how much to trim off the bottom, and ideally it'll work out such the top will fit in here so I don't have to trim that off. There's not quite as much excess to work with up here, and I would certainly rather not have to make 2 cuts if I can avoid it. Well, did a little reading and took a look at how the other door jambs are built, including that prefabbed one that I'm not going to use, and it seems pretty straightforward. Just need to pick up some lumber. Going to get ash or poplar or something similar. Get pieces that are 5 inches wide and 3/4 inches thick. This opening is 32 inches wide. Door is 30 inches wide, so I got an inch on either side. Use wood, it's about 3/4 on either side. and that should do nicely. And then I'll need a piece across the top, so I'll get 2 pieces 8 feet long, 1 piece 4 inches long. I can cut them down to length here with my chop saw, and we'll go from there. Oh, and as far as the hinges, I'm just going to go old school. I'll just use a chisel. These are just square hinges. Shouldn't be too hard to trace out with pencil. The door's already done, so I already know exactly where the hinges are going to go. So mount them to the door, line it up with the door jamb, trace it out, chisel it out, and that should be relatively easy, I hope. So I think the only real challenge is going to be trimming down the door vertically to fit in the opening. And it's actually not off that bad. I tried shimming it a little bit, because over the course of the about 6 foot high or 6.5 foot high door, it's only off by like 1/4 of an inch or so. So I don't need, it's more just make the door shorter than I need to make much of a severe angle to it. Well, I just got back from our local home improvement center, and I had a painful choice to make. Choice A was standard traditional 1x5 primed pine, meant for basically building door jambs. That's standard width. They call it 1x5. It's really 3/4 of an inch by 4.5 inch. And it came in, I think, an 8 foot length. I would have had to cut it down a little bit. No big deal. However, it's cheap wood, so I wanted to get something a little bit better. So I ended up going with poplar. Basically not free, really clean, not warped, but it is more than twice as much, and it's not primed. So it's also not a 1x5, it's a 1x6, which for a standard door would be too wide. I'd have to rip it down. Also couldn't get quite the lengths I wanted because their saw was down for maintenance, so I'm going to have to cut all this myself. Also means I had to pay more than I wanted to because they sell it by the foot. So at least for the vertical ones, they had 2 that were the same length, and it's just about what I need. I just have to trim off a little bit so I didn't overpay a whole lot for these. For the jamb, that was the shortest I had. So in the end, $15 door, about twice that much to build a door jamb. Oh well. I figure I'll start out with the top piece. So as I said, this opening is wider than normal. So these, I believe, are 5.5 inches wide. So it fits exactly, and that's exactly the lumber they used in here. So it'll work out all right. So I suppose I should prime this before I install it, but when it is installed, it'll look something like that, which I think will be just fine. I'll prime it white. So yeah, pay a little bit more, but it's, like I said, it's good wood. Next option up would have been oak, but I do not look forward. Well, I don't look forward to more just seeing this out. I sure as heck wouldn't want to try doing oak without some type of power tools and a jig, which I do not have, and I am not going to buy anything like that. I don't even have a router because I just don't do that much work like this. So basically I need to make chiseled out sections just like that on the door jambs. So first thing I'm going to do is cut the header, and then I'll work on the sides. I'm going to need to cut the carpet back a little bit because I really want to get the wood all the way down to the plywood. So I think I'll pull up, I'll pull up tacks on this and try to peel this back. I imagine there's carpeting and then some padding underneath that, and then there should be some plywood. And or I'll just, what the heck, I'll make this complicated. I guess I'll just cut this out with the utility knife. I want to get this all the way down to solid wood. So bit by bit we're getting there. Oh, and here's the hinges I'll be using, which fit in here very nicely, and the holes kind of line up, but not quite. One of them does perfectly, another one close enough. The other two, do the best I can. May have to enlarge the holes and then jam some scrap wood in there to kind of fill it out to give the screw something to grip into. But given that we got 3 hinges here with 4 screws on each hinge, I think we'll be all right. The door is a bit heavy because of the glass. Normally an interior door you only need 2 hinges, but as I say, this is a little bit more substantial. It's probably originally maybe an exterior door, like onto an enclosed porch or something. I don't know that it was. Well, it might have been exposed to elements. I don't know. Also a little small for an entrance door, another widthwise. Normally you'd have a main entrance door a little bit wider than that. But I said maybe this was onto a porch or a back door or something like that. Oh, and I also picked up some shims. Can't have too many shims for an old house. So, never worked with these before. They are scraps of wood cut at an angle, and you can put 2 of them together, and you slide them, and the more you slide it, the thicker it gets. You can see it's cut at a right angle, and then only one side is tapered, so when you put 2 of these together, it ends up being, well, flat. So I got 2 under the door here, and finally we can see what the door will look like. So, got about that much on this side, and a bit more on the other side. So if I was going to cut off the top, well, cut off right about there, but see, that would only leave that much. That's why I'm cutting off the bottom. I suppose I could flip the door upside down, maybe, but I don't think, not so sure the angle would end up being right then. But I also don't want to try scribing it on the carpet, so I'm going to grab a scrap of wood so I get a flat surface underneath here, and I'll shim it and then scribe it and then see about cutting it. I can definitely see the advantage of buying pre-primed lumber, but it wasn't too bad. A couple passes with a foam brush and some interior primer. I just did the edges and one face. I didn't bother doing the side it's going to go against the wall. And I just took off the stuff that was on the bottom of the door, and guess what I found? Somebody actually made this door taller than it was originally. They tacked a piece of wood onto the bottom. So I'll be taking that off. Unfortunately, that won't be enough to make the door the height that I need, but I thought that was curious. Who knows what kind of history this door has. I also like this thing. So this goes on the side opposite the hinges, so when the door swings open, this presumably would snap into something that would be mounted on the wall to hold the door open. So, see if I can reuse that. Try to find some something that this can hook onto. I think it'd be a nice feature to keep the door held open. Okay, time for some power tools. First board I'm going to cut is for the header. I measured the door width opening, and it's 32 inches plus just a hair, so I'm going to mark it on here. I owned this square for years before I noticed that you could unscrew it, and there's a little scribe in there. Way better than using a pencil. Much finer score mark you can make. So here's 32, and that would so I'll do like 32 and a 16th. Just gonna put a little mark, and then take this and scribe across the whole thing. Like so. Go. Nice clean line. And to cut it, I'm going to be using this reconditioned Ryobi miter saw. It's got a built-in laser guide, which I don't mess with. It's off a little bit, and I don't think it really helps all that much. So get that up here. So if this laser light was on, it would throw a red line across here, but I tried to align it, and it's a little wonky, and I read online other people had similar trouble, so that's why I just gave up on it. So I know approximately where the blade's going to come down. I know I'm a little bit to the side of the line. I'll just get a feel for where the blade is and then slide the board over. And oh, I think this saw is going to be just wide enough to cut the board in one shot, otherwise I'd have to flip it over. I'm going to have to flip it over. Oh well. Not the end of the world. If I'd gotten a 5-inch board like I wanted, I think I'd be just fine. Hold this so I don't want the boards to go flying off, but oh well. Trim that up just a little. Alright, cool. So, one board down. Let's go see how this fits. So how did I do? Well, store opening's got 3 parts to it. There's trim on either side and then the inner board. And they're not all quite lined up. So if I try to just put this in, it's too wide. However, if I pass that and get inside the inner board, it fits. In fact, it's actually kind of loose. Well, that's because I did a kind of a lousy job here, because this inner board seems like it's this way a little bit, so there's a gap on this side, but it's touching on this side. But that's alright. That's why you cut this board to be full width, because then when you put on the side pieces, it butts up to this, and that will be completely hidden by the piece of wood up here, so it just doesn't matter. Just don't want it to be too long or too short. Now, I got some small finish nails that I'm going to tack this in place with, and I was thinking I could use wood screws to really hold this firm, and if I ever wanted to pull it down, wouldn't be too bad. However, of course, if I use wood screws, the heads will be much more visible than finish nails, so I'm a little on the fence about that. But for now, I'll use little finish nails I got. Here's what I'm going to be using. I don't know how old these are, and I inherited these from my father's garage. Found them in an old tool chest. Just long enough that they'll go through this board and give me a bit of grip into the underlying wood. I'm going to start them down here because I don't want to try hammering overhead. And these are small enough, I don't think I got to worry about pre-drilling or splitting the wood or anything. I just want to get a few in here. Hold it up, and then I will work on the side pieces. I started cutting away the carpeting, and I quickly discovered that there is no padding. It explains why this is so friggin' hard up here. I said this carpeting is just crap, so I don't really care about tearing up some of it. That's pretty much enough. I'm not going to cut all the way down to the wood. That's enough to jam a piece of wood down there and it won't look too terrible. So that's the next thing I do is grab one of the side pieces and measure it and trim it off. Alright, 2 down, 1 more to go. I think you get the idea now. And then there'll be a 3rd piece over here, and the door fits inside that. And once you get the hinges mortised in, then you put some trim around here, so when the door Remember, the door is going to swing this way, so you want to have some trim around here so when it's closed it pushes up against that, and I'll have to mortise in something to line up with this catch here too. Now, the one disadvantage to using wide boards like this is the door is going to be set in a bit, but then again, this whole opening is wider than normal anyways, so. But if I had gotten boards like there were, let's say, this wide, then the door would be sitting here when it's closed. But now it's going to be sitting more like back here. So in other words, the door will be a little bit recessed, but honestly, for this application, it really doesn't matter. And I think you can see when you put these two together, nice tight seam. Doesn't matter about things being a little bit off here. And this is nice and clean under here. I could also put some like rounded over trim or something around this whole perimeter too to really kind of dress it up. But that can say that'll be saved for last. I can do that anytime. Also learned something else out today. Hammering overhead is not much fun. Okay, now for the fun bit, finally trimming the door. I've got it pretty well centered in there. I'm going to have to be a little more precise about it to make sure I got it exactly how I want it. You can see with that trim now, yeah, it's got to be nailed down. I don't want to do that yet because, of course, I got to mortise out and drill holes and stuff for the hinges. The other side I could secure though. But you see with that in place, there's just a bit of a gap on either side. That's exactly the point of it. But now I got to cut down the door. So I had enough left off from the header that it gives me a nice flat platform on the bottom. I got some shims in there. The door is pretty well vertical. So now I got to figure out how much to trim off. I probably will end up cutting the top. I think if I'm going to do all this work, I might as well do a proper job. But I want to trim off like a 1/4 inch on the top, so the bulk of it's going to come off the bottom. So how much do I need to take off? Well, I got to take into consideration, I got it on a piece of wood that's 3/4 inch thick. I want to leave maybe 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch on the bottom, so it'll clear the carpeting and not stick or bind anywhere. And I want to likewise leave 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch at the top. And it's in winter, it's a bit dry, the wood's going to expand a little, although the wood will expand this way, not so much this way. So probably the door isn't really, door expanding is not really a concern now that I think about it. So as I say, the bulk of it's going to come off the bottom, so I've got to do a little thinking. But the idea is once I figure out how much I want to take off, I'll ideally build up some wood so it's the right thickness, and then I can mark along here and then see about cutting the door down. Alright, I think that'll do it. How do I know for sure? Well, I've got some nicely milled 1-inch stock, and it just fits on one side and it just fits on the other side, and I can run it up and down, and looks like we're good centered in the opening. So you know, it's really not off that much in the end. So that 1/4 inch maybe from one end to the other. So now finally figure out how much to trim off. Okay, I think I got at least a starting point on this. Measure top of the door to the bottom of this opening 1 1/4 inch. And I know that this is 3/4 inch, as is the board the door is sitting on. So if I was to cut the door right here 1 1/4 inch and take away this board, it should just fit tight on this side. So that's what I'm going to do. This dimension lumber just happens to be 1 1/4 inch, so I lay that down, scribe along there, cut that off. So more needs to get removed on this side. This is like 1 1/4 I said it was 1 1/4. This was like 1 3/4, so it's about ½ an inch more here. But I know the top I want to trim as well, so I'll get the bulk of it off the bottom, and then I'll trim kind of in an angle across the top there, just to finish things off. And here, at long last, is the magic line to cut. Got this up on sawhorses with some padding underneath them. Yeah, it's tempting to just grab my big old radial saw and just clamp a board to it, put it up against it as a fence, and just let her rip. But I don't know. Tell you what though, when I scored this, I didn't use a lot of pressure. It scored pretty deep, so maybe this wood isn't all that hard. That's why I want to try, at least initially, sawing it by hand. I can clean it up afterwards with a plane or a sander. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I want to take this hardware off because it's going to rattle around like crazy while I'm sawing. Well, it only took me about 2 minutes to get to here. This is soft, very likely is pine. So yes, I could do all of this by hand. However, I can already see that I'm getting a little bit off here. I've been trying to compensate, but I know it's going to be a little Yeah, I can clean it up afterwards, but now I'm thinking I'm going to try power saw. At least I'll get it set up. So I'm thinking if it's soft wood, that also means that it's not going to, it's going to cut very quickly and easily and not really stress this out. Like if it was oak or something, it'd probably be really biting into it and vibrating the whole door. So I'm going to go dig it up and dig up a couple clamps and find a board to use as a fence and see what I can get done. Should probably also pull this off because there might very well be nails going in here. I do not want to hit with my saw. Yeah, it looks like there are, and they countersunk them or set them in pretty deep. Just 3, I think. Boy, I'm glad I took that off. That would have messed up a saw blade for sure. So here is my saw, also a Ryobi, and here's the blade it came with, which is pretty aggressive. If you're cutting pine 2x4s, it's great, but on finer woodwork, kind of tears it up. I'm not crazy about buying a saw blade for one project, but I'll take a look. So I'm sure I'll be using it again for stuff, and it's not too expensive. I guess I could justify it. Now this does have this thing. I'm going to remind myself, I think it goes on the front here, which can act as a guide, or does act as a guide as you're sawing. You put it against that, and you can adjust it for how you're cutting, but I'm so close to the edge, I don't think I can make use of this. Plus, I don't want to follow the edge of this because this is not straight. It's going to be at an angle. So what I'm going to do is get a hunk of wood and clamp it down at each end following that angle so the blade will cut on that. So I'll get it set up so that the bed of this rides against the board and cuts along at the right angle. I'm not crazy about the clamps I've got now. I want to get some of those trigger squeeze type clamps, and while I'm there I'll look at what kind of saw blades they've got. Measure the diameter of this. Looks like it's 10 inch, 7 inch. There we go. 7 1/4 inch, 24 tooth. So that miter saw I was using earlier, that one I did replace the stock blade. It has much finer teeth. I don't recall what the exact number is. I'll take a look on it, but I know I can get something a lot less aggressive than that. Just got back. More expensive decisions to make, but I think in the long run I'll be happy. So this blade is for coarse framing. I mean, there's no wonder that it's torn up. Stuff I've tried to cut in the past. So 24 coarse teeth, that's for like ripping through plywood, 2x4s and framing decks and stuff. So, and there's several other grades, and I was torn between finish and ultra finish. Finish being 40 teeth, ultra finish being 60. Finish can still do some plywood and masonite or melamine and hardwoods and softwoods, whereas this is not meant for plywood, but it's the finest blade they had. And as you might imagine, coarser blades cheap. $10 for this, 15 for the finish, and 20 for the ultra finish. But generally, not that I cut a whole lot of wood, but I tend to do more finer woodworking than coarse woodworking, so that's why I got that. And these cost more than I thought they did. Just a single larger one, like $20. So I opted to get this 4-pack, 2 small ones, 2 medium-sized ones for $35. So yeah, this project's going to be a little more expensive than I envisioned, but I'll have these tools. So in the end, I'm going to end up spending about $100 on various tools, blades, and so on. About $100 on wood and trim and hardware, like the hinges, and $15 for the door. I'm installing the rip fence now using a leftover piece of the door jamb material. Here's a closer look at one of the trigger clamps I just picked up. Metal bar, 2 pieces of plastic. Squeeze this to release that. It's a button if you want to remove that end. And you squeeze the trigger, squeeze the trigger to tighten it down. So let's get one over on this side. Alright. So the saw will ride along. I gotta keep pressure against that. Make sure the clamps don't get in the way. And I've already got the cut started so I can line it up with the blade. And on this side I just measured it. So I got the same distance along my scribed line. And here, this thing does also have a laser pointer on it. It's been a while since I used this. I don't remember how useful it is. I guess that's going to be it. So make sure these clamps are out of the way. I've only done this kind of thing a few times, and I know that, especially with that coarse blade, it's very easy if you bump into anything to really screw up and have your cut go way off mark. Basically only got one chance to get this right, so take it slow and easy. Okay, saw is plugged in. If I just put a little bit of pressure on the trigger, it engages the laser light, and I can already tell you it's off. It's off because I can see where the blade is, and it's, well, it's not lined up. But anyways, without further ado, make sure this is clamped down tight. Here we go. Well, that worked great, nice and smooth. The blade made a huge difference, but one little problem, the blade depth is not deep enough to go all the way through the door. So I gotta see if I can adjust the blade depth. Otherwise I gotta flip the door or finish it with a handsaw. But no, I can see that I've only got about halfway through. Of course you can adjust the blade depth, really easy to do. You flip this lever up, and there you go. I haven't used this saw in a couple of years, so a little rusty. So, and I do have it unplugged right now, so I'm going to adjust this so that it will just go through. It's right about there. Lock it down, plug it in, and let's try this again. Very nice clean cut, no tear out at all. Just one little issue. See, here's where I started cutting it with a handsaw. This blade is not at a right angle, it's off a little bit. Here, I'll grab a square. So, check that out. So, I presume there's an adjustment on the saw somewhere. So let's see if I can figure that out, get this thing at a right angle and do another pass. Not the end of the world, even if I left it as is. It's not off that much, but it'd be nice to get it at a nice right angle. Yeah, of course there's an adjustment for the angle of the bed. You loosen that up and you can move this around. So it was all the way down, which looks like it actually is over 90 degrees. So that it should come up a little bit. I'm sure they got some tips somewhere about how to do that. Again, I do have it unplugged, so I kind of want to get this guard out of the way, and then take a square and put it on the bed and against the blade and get this so that it's a perfect right angle, and then do another pass. Okay, I moved the fence back a 1/16 of an inch. Got my saw at as right an angle as I can figure. So let's give this another try. That's much better. Unfortunately, I'm starting to cut into some of the structure of the door. I think that's some kind of peg that's holding this together, so I'll fill that in with some wood filler. So let's see how I did. Alright, it's not perfect, but it's pretty close to perfect. It's certainly good enough. So this left side is lined up pretty well. The wall, I think, bows out a little in the middle, but that'll be fine. Mount the hinges on there. Got a good size gap. So when I put the hinges in, I'll put some shims under the door to get a little bit off the carpet. I think that's a good enough gap over there. So now we got to trim a little off the top because, well, it's too high over on this side. So I'll measure the gap here and mark off here and then scribe a line and do the same deal with the clamps and all that and trim the top off a little bit. That was a long time coming, better part of a Saturday afternoon, but there she is. Good enough for me. No, it's not perfect, but the house isn't perfect, so these walls are not perfectly straight up and down. I would really have to scribe it and use a jigsaw if I wanted to get it absolutely perfect, but there's plenty enough clearance all around. So I'm going to take a break for a while, and the next thing to do will be to start laying out the hinges. I'll put something up under the door to get it up just a little bit. I think the stir from a paint can will do. It's like a 1/16 of an inch thick. And I'll mount the hinges to the door and then mark out on the jamb where they line up. I just have one nail holding this jamb in so I can pop it out easily. And then I will pre-drill for the screw holes and mortise them out. The hinges I got are square, so no big deal. I'll just use a chisel and a hammer. Okay, so hinges. So a few things. One, the mortise on the doors is deep enough that both halves of the hinge are virtually flush with the door. You can see that better here. I don't see any reason to mortise this out at all. I suppose having a mortise adds a little bit of strength to it, but with 12 screws all together holding this thing on, I'm not too concerned about that. Also, I don't need this to be any closer than it is already. There's going to be a bit of a gap over here. So, yeah, they talk about this, everything's standard width. You want an inch on either side. Standard is to use 3/8 inch trim. You want a little bit of a gap. But I think that also presumes you're going to use some shims to get the door jamb lined up. Well, I didn't do that. I didn't need to because this jamb is going right to the framing. So basically there's going to be virtually no gap on that side and a bit of a gap over here. So if anything, I might want the hinges to come out a little more. All right, well, worry about that later. Something else I got to deal with is this salvaged door hardware I'm using. This is backwards. This should be facing the other way because the door is going to swing in this way, so you want this beveled part to be, well, to go in and then spring out and catch on the corresponding hardware on the other side. So, and yes, I realize all these hinges are on upside down. The head of the pin should be on the top, not the bottom. However, if I flip it around like this, none of the screws line up. So that's why I've got it like that. I hope when I knock the pin out, I can put it in at either end and it won't matter. And I can flip them around. For now, got top and bottom with a couple screws. I'm going to put it up against the wall. I'm going to mark out 2 screws to go into the jamb. Do a little drilling and give this a try. Well guys, believe it or not, we have a functioning door. Perfect amount of clearance at the bottom. It stays open. That's the advantage of me spending a lot of time of making sure that everything was plumb and sacrificing having the top and bottom cut at angles that the door stays where you put it because it's balanced. And I am beat. So I'll leave you with a few thoughts on what's next. Trim. So yeah, it's kind of ugly around here. Could get some trim around there, and then I have to trim out the door too, so you don't have this gap all around here. So what am I talking about? Well, this is all I have on hand. It's not quite right, but I think you get the idea. This is some quarter round stock. So imagine there's something like this in there. Hides up all the ugliness, makes a nice tight seal. Do a little miter joint at the top. Look nice and neat. Eventually strip and paint the door. Get better hardware. Get something on this side so it doesn't just whack against the baseboard. I need to get some bigger nails to hold this in. And obviously I need to finish putting in screws. So actually I'm going to run and get some toothpicks of all things. So that's one thing you can do. So I'll drill out these holes so that they line up. And then I need to jam something in there to give the screws something to bite into, otherwise the screw is just going to be flopping around. Toothpicks are made out of hardwood, and they actually make a pretty good filler for when you have a hole that's too large and a wood screw isn't finding purchase in it. And here's how it looks from the other side. It is rubbing a little bit, which is probably just another quirk of this house, nothing being quite lined up. Plenty of clearance over here, and it bites just a little here, which is exactly what we want because it keeps the door shut. Eventually, well, obviously, when there's hardware, it lines up. So you see there's a bit of a gap. So yeah, we've got a fairly large gap on this side, 3/8 of an inch. I may have to build this out a little bit. Worst case scenario, I'll get a piece of wood that's like a 1/4 of an inch thick or something and put it on this, or shim this out and pull it away. Again, that's the advantage of using trim, is that you can have all kinds of ugliness down in here and shim this out, pull it away from the wall. I don't have big nails in here yet, so it's not hard to pop this off. And there's no load or anything on this, so it doesn't need to be super secured to the wall. This is the side. This is where you want to do all your focus on where the hinges go. Here, listen to me talking like I've ever actually done this before. Oh, that's curious. Some of the white paint's flaking up. We see there's green underneath here. There are quite a few layers of paint on here. So yeah, eventually may strip all this off, reglaze the glass. But save that for another day for sure. A few last thoughts before I'm going to leave off this segment. Would I do this again? So yes, I'm still not done. I've spent hours on this and a bit of money. If you only have one door to do and you don't have the tools, no, hire somebody. A guy who knew what he was doing could knock this out in an hour or two and everything would be lined up great. He'd have all the jigs for the hinges. If you find somebody who's remodeled houses, they would know exactly how to do all this stuff. It'd be like old hat to them. But I get a few things out of it. One, experience. I plan on replacing some other doors in our place, so now I got a little know-how. I hope I made an entertaining video for you all. I'm more familiar with some of the tools I have, and I've got some new tools, some sawhorses, some better clamps, better saw blade. So, yeah, for me in the end it was worth it, plus, you know, satisfaction of accomplishing something I hadn't done before. One other tip I want to leave you with is, I've been warned about doing this before. Whenever you do any home remodeling stuff, you may think you've contained your work area, but as soon as you start doing anything with plaster, anything with sanding, anything with sawing, you are going to have stuff drifting everywhere. Especially with me using this fine-tooth saw blade, there is there's going to be a bit of cleanup. I've already started vacuuming, but I've been really surprised at how far it's spread out into the adjoining rooms. So I am going to spend, after I take a break, get cleaned up a little bit, pack away my tools, I'm going to spend some time vacuuming up here and dusting. That's for sure. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this look at installing a vintage door. I will pick up at some point in the future when I find some better hardware and so on, and we'll revisit this. But this is the bulk of the work. I hope you enjoyed watching it, maybe picked up a few tips. Oh, and I'm sure that there's a better way to do everything that I've done. No doubt. Like I said, I've never done this before. I wanted to keep it somewhat economical, use tools I had, materials I had on hand, and just try things and see what happened. So I'm sure lots of you have suggestions for me and tips and so on. And I appreciate it if you leave them, but just be aware that I know I'm not doing everything right. And I haven't done this before. And it was fun. It was interesting. That's all for now.